It's been a long time since we've talked about some recent releases, hasn't it? You know, in the 5 recently released albums that you should check out format. Amazingly, this is around the time whenever this series began last year, so we are really not that far off. But we do have a lot of things that we need to talk about that we missed so far in these first 5 months. So stay tuned in the coming weeks for a couple of special videos that will chronicle as many of those as I was able to get my hands on in order to speak about. And that does include some bigger names, so you definitely will want to check those out. But here we are, it's time for us to begin the 2017 season of recently released albums, and we're going to do so with a bang, with 7 or 8 or I don't know, I can't count. Let's just go ahead and get started and see how it goes. Here are some recently released albums that you need to scope out immediately. And we're going to begin with Times Undone by the band Carnac. Now, this is a group from Turkey that is making their full-length debut. They released an EP previous to this, and what this band does is combines death metal with progressive metal, as well with melodic riffing and even some black metal charm. It's very interesting what this band is able to do. They sound really years beyond where they actually are in their development, with this only being their first album. And it's really showing in the way in which they balance their album as well, considering they have 3-minute tracks offset by 5, and then whenever you get to the back half of this disc is whenever you get your epics, such as This Vital Spark or Fire. Both of these tracks are over the 7-minute mark and showcase that sort of diversity that they have, considering they can blend some quick black metal riffing that is able to also sound a little melodic in places, showcase that progressive spark a little bit, almost to the tune of a little bit of post-metal, and then really drive the point home that they are firmly rooted in the death metal catalog as well. I like what these guys do. You should scope these guys out since this is a debut, and if you do, tell them Cover Killer Nation sent you. Let's move on. Let's go from a band that had their debut album to a band that has their second album coming, or actually just released. Alien World by Below the Sun. This is a doom metal band that does exhibit, kind of like Carnac, some symbols and signs of the progressive genre as well. And really, I think what makes Below the Sun such a different project is their element of sonoscape, the way in which they're able to really paint the scene atmospherically through their sound. And they are able to craft chaos whenever you hear some growling lyricism that sort of feels a little bit par for the course, but does also back the music up very nicely. And then you hear some very melodic but almost difficult to discern clean vocals that sort of beautifully offset the chaos that you hear. A track such as Mirrors, which is the second song off of this album, 8 minutes and 30 seconds, really is able to display this band at their height on this album. I love what they're able to incorporate, and there are times, like on the first song, Blind Ocean, which spans 11 minutes, or even the finale, In Memories, where the principal thing that Below the Sun does very well is that they do not overindulge. They instead are able to stay true to themselves and remain a bit minimalistic with their structure in order to really drive the point home of isolation, or perhaps the idea of being adrift in a strange world. I like what these guys do. If you like doom metal that has a little bit of a twist to it, I think you will as well. So definitely give Below the Sun a chance with their album Alien World. AVATARIUM is up next with their brand new album Hurricanes and Halos. This, of course, features Leaf, formerly of Candlemass, and is a female-fronted doom metal sextuplet. Or sextet, I guess. Sextuplet would be if they were, you know, all the same kids. We're going to go with it. I don't really care. This is an album that really takes the approach toward doom metal that's a little bit closer to the Black Sabbath side of things, meaning that it has a lot of root to just some standard rock and roll. You could almost hear a little bit of a band such as Clutch in this, but definitely a lot of Sabbath worship is taking place in order to craft this number. And really, that is easily to sort of relate to whenever you hear Into the Fire, Into the Storm, the very first cutoff of this disc, or even whenever you move on to the Starless Sleep, rather. But really, what is very impressive about this is how they're able to transform some of those concepts into a more traditional doom format with a track such as Medusa Child, and how these female vocals sound very relaxed, almost as though there's a little bit of stoned out fuzz sort of a little bit of Cottonmouth maybe in her vocals in order to give it a little bit more of that charm that doom metal is able to deliver sometimes. I think that some people may find this album to be really crafty in its, sort of subtle genius, in the fact that it's able to go back to a simpler day and age, a simpler concept, something that's getting a lot of new attention here in the 2010s with sort of that Black Sabbath-inspired bluesy doom metal, and is really doing something very cool. It's cool to see Leaf playing bass on this album and just sort of kicking ass in the process. So check these guys out. They certainly have delivered with this disc, Hurricanes and Halos by AVATARIUM. It was really a good week for doom metal, because we have another one. This one's more ambient doom or ambient black metal in Tenebriz with the brand new album As the Spring Uncover Pain. I almost said these guys, but it is a one-man show. He's been doing this for quite some time. He has a number of albums under his belt, close to 10 with this project. And this is kind of interesting. A lot of this has a very cool and calm ambient themology to it that is a little bit dark and dense when it needs to be. And of course, whenever the vocals start to cue up is where everything goes full tilt to the dark intensity, to the very sort of morbid intensity that you are a little bit more akin to seeing in a ambient black metal band or a one of those dense atmospheric black metal bands. At times, these vocals are a little bit rugged. For some of the other albums within this project, there has been mainly instrumental passages, and that definitely seems to be a little bit of the strength that is possessed here. It certainly shows itself on the longest track of this album, the finale, Pale Forest. But aside from that, not too bad. If you are an atmospheric black metal freak, if you need to have something like this in your life, then you have perhaps found your answer from this past week in Tenebriz with As the Spring Uncover Pain. If you're curious, give them a give him and his project a go. Next up, we have Ravage with Return of the Spectral Rider. This is a continuation of an album that was released in 2005 by the simple name Spectral Rider, and this is standard heavy metal, thrash metal if you really want to call it that, but really you could just put it under the heavy metal umbrella with a little bit of speed attached, and you get what these guys are all about. This is a 12-track affair that strength is in its musicality, it's in its overall construction, which is fairly decent run-of-the-mill heavy metal, but it's presented in a way that does give it a lot of underground charm. And really, whenever you hear some of these vocals, it will take you straight back to the 1980s, where thrash metal vocals weren't thrown through the ringer in order to deliver the best possible quality. It definitely has that very underground, very 1980s charm to it, where not every note sounds perfect, and in fact, one of the biggest things that it has going in its favor is the fact that it is rough, that it is not 100% perfect, that it does have errors and flaws. You can definitely get that right away from Spectral Rider, which kind of brings you back into the fold of what their 2005 album was able to accomplish. Mask of the Black Death is kind of a neat take on the Mask of the Red Death, which is a really, really good movie. This is a band that I feel like sort of wants to be like Iron Maiden and a little bit of Megadeth, and then just kind of carve out their own identity. And it's a really cool listen if you like old school heavy metal that has a little bit of that speed metal quality in it. Ravage is your band. There's a lot of other groups that have this name, so definitely be very, very careful whenever you are trying to locate this. Do not be fooled. The album is entitled Return of the Spectral Rider. That's what you want to seek, so scope them out. Windrose with the brand new album Stonehymn. This is progressive power metal. They would call themselves, I believe, troll metal, whatever it may be, or dwarven metal. Either way, this is high fantasy. This is what you would almost consider seeing sitting on a bookshelf as opposed to naturally being in musical form. But of course, in this sort of epic fantasy metal scheme, this is very par for the course, almost like picking up one of those books and gaining the soundtrack for them. And this is an album by a band, third album by this group, so it is their junior effort that certainly shows their chops and what they're available and able to do. And this is cool because it's sort of split into two parts as well, considering Distant Battlefields is an introduction to the first, I guess the first half of this with Dance of Fire, Under the Stone to Eleanor. Erebor rather, and the returning race, and then we have the Animist, really featuring the beginning of the Wolf's Call, Fallen Timbers, and the Eyes of the Mountain, which sort of finished this album off. And I dig this because this is storytelling that is done both musically as well as lyrically, and it's not one that needs to kind of blind you with a lot of over-aggressive power metal riffs, either that or frequent and long-winded soloing in order to get the job done. It instead focuses very much on the fantasy. It focuses very much on the on getting the story across with just very sort of standard to above average power metal riffing and power metal construction swirling around it. This is going to feel typical to a lot of those that are sort of power metal veterans. They might not see this as being too much, but I kind of like this only because of how it focuses on that story and delivers it. I really like how a track such as The Returning Race, which is 7 minutes and 22 seconds, starts off with a very slow pace and really aims to deliver plot in this sort of story-style dump, almost as though it's being told by an outside perspective, or I always imagine it being told in a tavern with, you know, a flashback sequence immediately following, if this were a movie version of the song itself. And then it really rip-roars to the finale after you get to the Animist and get into the last 3 songs of this album. So if you enjoy some high fantasy, if you enjoy not only that sort of literature but also that sort of music, and power progression is something that's up your alley, then Windrose should certainly be on your radar, especially this brand new album, Stonehymn. So give it a listen. We end our premiere journey here in 2017 with the 5 recently released series with Solstafir, with Berdreyminn. This is a band that has taken an interesting course to where they are now, and that is the fact that they started off with the Viking and black metal as their persuasion, but has now moved on to become a post-metal / rock sort of weird phenomenon. It's strange to hear these guys these days after knowing what their earliest tomes were able to accomplish, and you do still hear certain elements of that still present, considering some of these post-metal riffs and licks definitely have some of the veneer of what has become the post-metal department, or even a little bit of black gaze. The atmosphere is certainly the one thing that channels heavily on this, and the lyricism and vocals have taken on a much cleaner veneer also. You take a listen to the second track, Isophord, and you get a very standard sort of rock-sounding track, but it has a lot of melancholy to it. It's almost like they were injected with a dose of catatonia in order to give them a little bit of further sort of 1980s The Cure style charm. But then you move on to Hula, and it immediately is this sort of very atmospheric and sort of Drody style work that just has not a lot of motion required for it in order to get its point across. It's strangely really satisfying to listen to this album all the way through, considering there are calming moments that certainly offer you a tuft or two of serenity that are then offset with some heavier aggressive riffing from time to time to maybe take you a little bit out of your element and really present sort of what you get on this album cover, which definitely does not suggest some of the music that's within it, aside from the fact that it is a melancholy affair. I'm not sure how people really feel about this version, about this morphology of Solstafir, but I will say this, from the perspective of a man who enjoys this style of music, I really like the change, although it was just not something that I necessarily saw coming. Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. We have 7 recent releases that you should certainly investigate and scope out for yourselves. If you feel that there were any that were missed over this past weekend, definitely leave them in a comment so I can potentially check them out and address them in a future tweet or a video. Either that, what are you most excited for next week? What releases that are coming have you really hyped up? And are you glad the series is back? Let me know in a comment below. I am coverkillernation, and I will talk to you guys next time whenever we speak about 5 more recent releases that you should certainly examine. Take care.